Thank you, Jason. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today as we launch our new webinar series, Creating a Life Full of Possibilities. I am Michael Leyva, Contracts and Grants Coordinator for the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. I'm proud to be part of the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Network team, collaborating to highlight the need for broader acceptance and inclusion of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities across the state. We're kicking off our new webinar series to help individuals with disabilities design and prepare for a life full of opportunities and possibilities. We believe every person deserves to fully participate in life rather than observe from the sidelines. That includes access to valued roles and being seen as a person rather than a disability label. It is my pleasure to introduce Cheryl Bates-Harris, our speaker for today's webinar. Cheryl is a passionate advocate for disability rights and has dedicated her career to promoting independence, inclusion, and empowerment for individuals with disabilities. With more than 33 years experience, Cheryl brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to today's discussion. As part of the employment team at the National Disability Rights Network, Cheryl is responsible for training of a program designed to assist Social Security beneficiaries achieve maximum economic self-sufficiency. She has extensive experience in vocational rehabilitation and the Client Assistance Program, return to work issues including job placement, supported and customized employment, reasonable job accommodations, basic employment law, and Social Security programs and work incentives. Cheryl's commitment to creating inclusive environments and empowering individuals to achieve their goals has made her a respected leader in the field. Her innovative approach to person-centered planning has transformed the lives of countless youth and young adults with disabilities, helping them to navigate the challenges of transition and achieve their full potential. Please join me in welcoming Cheryl Bates-Harris. We are grateful for her expertise and insights, and we look forward to an engaging and informative discussion. One more item. At the end of the webinar, we will share a brief survey. Please take a few moments to complete the survey and share your thoughts. Now let's hear from Cheryl on person-centered planning, the steps to your future. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Michael, and welcome everyone in Arizona. It's a little bit earlier out there. So I'm going to bring up my presentation here. If you'll just give me a second, and some of you may have to kind of readjust your screens. So again, thank you very much for having me. I'm going to talk today about person-centered planning, which is a phrase that was kind of coined specifically when it refers to individuals with disabilities. But everybody, regardless of disability or not, is responsible for person-centered planning because it basically determines who you are and what you want to do with your life. So having said that, I'm going to get started with just one additional note that there's a couple of people participating in this who my paths have crossed with in previous experiences. So it's nice to see them again. So I always look at disability issues through a lens of they may be a person with a disability, but they are still people first. And everybody, regardless of disability or not, people want to live in their community. They want to be able to work in their community. They want to, they want to be able to have friends. They want to be able to recreate and have fun in the community. And they want to have relationships with other people. And they should be able to choose those relationships. The relationships should not be thrust upon them. People always want to be respected, and people always want to be able to make choices. So these are basic, I think, what I refer to as basic tenets of what most people want in life. and people with disabilities are no different. But people with disabilities have some consequences and some effects of their disability that, again, can be pretty debilitating. And part of the consequences of disability include things like isolation. People with disabilities are often kept segregated, and so they feel very alone, other than if they're in a group home, they may see their group home residents, but they don't get that full interaction. As a result, people are lonely, again, because they may not have the ability to choose their friends and choose their relationships. And when you're isolated and you're lonely, or you're unemployed, there's a high level of depression as a result of disability, particularly if the disability is an acquired disability, because the person now has to adjust to these significant changes in their life. And there's a lot of dependence that results as a result of disability. People feel the need to take care of other people. And if they don't have a steady job and income, there's a real need for dependence there, dependence on where they're going to live, dependence on how they're going to get transportation to services that they want to go to. I don't know why this keeps bouncing. I apologize. If they don't have an income and they don't have a job, and of course, people with disabilities are twice as likely as people without disabilities to live in poverty. And the employment rate of people with disabilities continues to be low. Although the good news is we've seen a marked increase over the last 10 years. So person-centered planning, I am so sorry. I don't know what's going on with this computer. So person-centered planning is really just a process to help people help themselves. And here you see 3 pictures. I'm going to very quickly describe them. In the upper left-hand side, you see some individuals, diverse individuals, basically in an agricultural setting, holding boxes of vegetables and produce. Some people like gardening. Some people like to work in that kind of environment. Then going directly below, we have a woman in a red hat putting on a pair of gloves. She may be preparing to clean an industrial facility. She may be preparing to clean her own house. Who knows? And over to the right, we see someone working in an industrial setting using a forklift. So these are all kinds of options that are available to people, and by no means are these options limited. So what is person-centered planning? I'm going to just boil it down to the basic. It's a natural rite of passage, okay? Every single one of us gets to decide what we want to be when we grow up, except if you're a person with a disability. And thinking until fairly recently, if you were a person with a disability, there was this very paternalistic attitude that you needed to be taken care of, rather than you needed to grow your wings and fly, so to speak. So person-centered planning is about learning to amplify your voice, expressing yourself, telling people what it is you want to do. And more importantly, the question that I think every individual, regardless of disability or not, should be asked when they enter kindergarten is, what do you want to be when you grow up? That plants the seed that part of being an adult and part of growing up means that you have to choose a vocational option, or you have to be something. So there are a lot of terms for very similar concepts. There's person-centered planning, there's self-directed planning, there's circle of supports. You may hear this called a number of different things, but basically it's all about driving me crazy. It's all about putting you, the individual with the disability, at the center of control. And the process is really designed to be results oriented. We don't ask people what they want to be when they grow up if we really don't expect them to do anything. So the results of this process is to really identify where it is you want to go in life, what it is you want to achieve, and how are we going to get you there. So it's kind of a long-term plan with sometimes short-term goals. And it's a collaborative effort among many groups and many individuals. For a long time, we were told that only qualified rehab counselors could help people with disabilities with vocational goals, and people with disabilities needed specialized services and specialized supports. And actually, we've learned that the specialization in disability does not necessarily make things more effective. What does is the collaboration among different groups of people, the sharing of information, the blending of resources, and the mutual support from all of these other places and or people. So it puts you in charge of deciding what is best for you. And everybody should have their choice in what happens to their life. So the philosophy of person-centered planning really has 5 basic concepts. First of all, we're not interested in what somebody can't do. We're interested in looking at what are the strengths that the individual has, because we know that we can build on those strengths, and everyone has skills and talent. They may not have the same level of skills and talent, but what is it that you do? What is it that you do well? What is it that you like to do? So the concept behind person-centered planning is, let's look at the strengths, let's look at the good things, and where can we take that? So, and in order to sometimes figure that out, you have to look beyond just the service providers. A person who has been employed in a segregated employment setting may learn from the staff worker there. Their perception of what the strengths are may be entirely different than, say, their mom or dad, who says, you know, do you know that when he is not at that facility, he goes downstairs and he plays and puts computers together and creates, you know, does amazing things with assistive technology. So it's about making those connections so that everybody's contribution is heard. And then again, collaborating to make sure that those interests and those skills are fully supported. So then the next concept really has to do with the person itself, because as I said, you are the center of your universe. So what are your rights to make choices? What are the choices that you would make, and who controls those choices? And the answer to all of that is, you should be the person who exercises your rights, who has your choices respected, and who has control to make things happen. If you have a naysayer in the group, or what I always call the vocational police, well, that's ridiculous. There's no way you could ever be an airline pilot. You don't need that person in your group for person-centered planning. You don't need naysayers. You need the positives around you who are going to support you. And then the fourth concept is about partnerships, teams, and communication. This is a joint effort. Everybody needs a little support at one time or another. So employment supports are not unique to people with disabilities. Employment supports exist naturally in the work environment. So again, working with other groups, it may be other service providers, it may be with your friends, it may be with your parents, it may be with your extended family, it may be with your church group or your Boy Scout organization, as an example. Everybody works in partnership for the same purpose and in teams, and there needs to be communication. Now, once you've developed basically what I call a person-centered plan of where you're going to get to, then it needs to be implemented and it needs to be monitored for progress. And if you run into an obstacle, like we thought this was going to go much more smoothly than it did, that doesn't mean that your goal and your person-centered planning is wrong. It simply means that we have to readjust our method of approaching the situation. And I'm sure you've all heard the expression that there is more than one way to skin a cat. And this is a typical example. You think something's going to work, it doesn't. That doesn't mean the answer is no and we give up. We need to allow people the dignity of risk to try new things, but we also have to kind of keep an eye on it. And if it doesn't look like it's going to work, then we regroup and we plan a different strategy. Okay, so this is really about what do you want your life to be about? And so here again, we have a graphic that has a goal on the left-hand side, an arrow pointing towards the goal, and lots of little characters working together for that goal. So we know, and this is where I become very, very passionate. We know that working is, I brought up the wrong thing. Working is fundamental to adulthood, quality of life issues, in earning the means to exercise our freedoms and choices as a citizen. In the PowerPoint that was distributed, and my apologies, we switched this quote out and used a different quote from Zig Ziglar, which is much better. So please just disregard this one for now. But I'm here to tell you that after working with people with disabilities for the better part of 35 years, okay, people with disabilities are among the poorest in the country, and work is your only route out of poverty. And I emphasize that because nobody likes to be poor and nobody likes to be broke. And the only way that you are going to improve your financial situation is through employment. So to talk about that and to fully understand the ramifications, we have to look at what is the public policy around the laws that govern our country. And I'm specifically here looking at a combination of the policy and goals of both the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the Americans with Disabilities Act amendments, which came about, I believe, in 2008. So the purpose of having a structured society is that our goals are to ensure equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for people with disabilities, okay? Economic self-sufficiency is really important. The next kind of purpose is that, and statement in both the Rehab Act and the ADA, is that meaningful employment is an essential piece in establishing and maintaining dignity, as well as well-being, and allowing access to the same opportunities afforded all members of society. And again, we are making huge strides, but for the longest time, it was believed that people with disabilities should be protected. They should go directly from the school system to a sheltered workshop where they would basically live out the rest of their days, and therefore they were denied the opportunities that everybody else had to obtain work and to choose the work that they do, because there was a stereotypic assumption about the abilities of people with disabilities. And the Rehabilitation Act, which is, of course, the founding legislation for the non-discrimination provisions that are found in the ADA, but it also funds services in each and every state specifically for people with disabilities to empower those individuals to maximize employment, economic self-sufficiency, independence, and inclusion and integration into society through coordinated services. So we have the ADA at the top, that is the total promise of non-discrimination. And it talked about non-discrimination in transportation. It talked about non-discrimination in public services, talks about non-discrimination in telecommunications, all areas that we have made tremendous strides in, but we are still lacking in that achieving the goal of economic self-sufficiency through the ADA. And so that's why the Rehabilitation Act becomes important. The Rehabilitation Act, which is a funding program, so to speak, and gets appropriations from Congress every year that goes to the 57 states and territories, has always had a focus on employment for people with disabilities. But in 2014, when the Rehabilitation Act was amended, which means it was updated, something happened for the first time. And for the first time, it defined competitive integrated employment. Before that, the goal had been what they said was competitive employment, but it had never been well defined. So now there's a very clear definition, and this is the standard, the gold standard that is expected across the country from these different programs. We're talking about full or part-time employment at minimum wage or above. Okay, so no longer is competitive employment allowed to be paid less than sub-minimum wage. It's wages and benefits similar to those without disabilities performing the same work. So if everybody else at the organization is getting health insurance and vacation leave and sick leave, people with disabilities are entitled to those same benefits and similar wages. And the important part here, I really think, is the fully integrated with coworkers without disabilities, okay? Where you spend your day is as equally as important as where you spend your nights or where you sleep. And for too long, going back to the ADA for a second, for too long, people believed that it was okay to provide services to people in segregated settings. And there was an Olmstead decision in 1999 that basically said the segregation, sorry, this is driving me crazy, that said that individuals who are unnecessarily segregated and not entitled to live in the community was a form of discrimination. And that was the first time anybody thought about housing as discrimination. And then that entire Olmstead concept was applied to a court case in Oregon and Providence, Rhode Island, which again said that unnecessary segregation of people with disabilities in a clustered work setting is a violation of the ADA. So now we want everyone competitively employed in full integration at real wages. So how do we get there? There's lots of options available. And I think sometimes the options are not well known to both individuals with disabilities as well as family services or families that support individuals with disabilities. So we're going to talk for a minute about vocational rehabilitation. As I indicated, the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency in every state receives money from the federal government to provide services and supports to help individuals obtain, maintain, regain, or employment consistent with their strengths, interests, priorities, and capabilities. Okay, that's the big picture of vocational rehabilitation. But again, in 2014, recognizing the fact that there was still a lot of issues around continued segregation in employment and the fact that individuals were not successfully transitioning from the education system to either post-secondary education or the world of work, Congress mandated that vocational rehabilitation agencies spend 15% of their funds on what we call pre-employment transition services. And so pre-employment transition services are available to individuals with disabilities who may or may not be eligible for vocational rehabilitation. But the intent was to make sure that our transition age youth, individuals who have been educated through IDEA through their high school years now, have the opportunity to understand what are some next options and opportunities for them. So pre-employment transition services include job exploration and counseling, okay? At 18 years old, I really didn't have a good idea of what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I enrolled in college thinking that a job that I had picked was really what I was going to be. But then it turned out after I got into it that it was not for me. So the job exploration and counseling is an opportunity for youth to sit down and actually explore what are some job opportunities. Perhaps the job exploration could be through job shadowing. It could be through interviewing different kinds of people in various positions. It can be done a number of ways, but it's really looking at what options are out there and receiving some counseling about why that might or might not be a good opportunity for that particular individual. Pre-employment transition services also includes work-based learning experience, which can include internships, but basically it's work experience. And it should, again, be provided in the least restrictive environment. So this theme of integration just goes throughout these public policies. So looking at where can you get some actual experience? Because once you have some experience to put on your resume, it's always easier to get your next experience, even if that's not the job you're going to work at forever and ever and ever. Then there's counseling enrollment about comprehensive transition services and post-secondary educational programs. And I know that one of your upcoming webinars is going to be on Think College in Arizona, which again is an evolving program where individuals with developmental disabilities are allowed to participate in college programs, not so much to achieve that degree, but to have those similar opportunities and experiences. And these are available. So counseling about what opportunities might be available. That could also be opportunities to participate in things like apprenticeship programs, short-term certificate programs, vocational, technical training schools for credentialed or licensed occupations. So again, the opportunities that are available to people without disabilities should also be available to people with disabilities. Then we have workplace readiness training to develop social skills. I'm kind of bemused at this particular one because usually, and my experience when I was doing job placement of individuals with disabilities, it was not generally their work skills that got people into trouble on the work sites. It was their social skills. And my step-granddaughter right now is actually taking a college class on how to interact with their peers, because we often get so tied up in our little devices, we forget how to talk to people. So social skills and soft skills needed in the workplace, making sure you keep track of time, knowing when to start and when to end, not spending too much time at the water cooler, those kinds of things. Sometimes people need to be reminded of. And then this last bullet point is really important. It's about receiving instruction and self-advocacy. So understanding you have the right to speak up for yourself and that you have certain rights, particularly around employment. And so instruction in self-advocacy, which can include peer mentoring. And peer mentoring is really just two individuals who are similarly situated with either the same disability or the same set of circumstances, whether it be, lack of accessible public transportation or whatever, can talk and help each other resolve the situation that's facing them. So these are just things that are available through pre-employment transition services. And as I said, they're available to individuals who don't necessarily have to apply for VR or be vocational rehabilitation ready to apply for VR. So all of this fits together again under a big umbrella. And there's a lot of disability policy concepts that apply here. I've already mentioned the fact that we have Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And when that was originally passed in 1975, and it has since been reauthorized several times, we mean that all children with disabilities are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, and all means all. When we look at the social history of deinstitutionalization, moving people out of DD facilities or moving people out of psychiatric facilities, we didn't say that we should only deinstitutionalize certain of those populations. We said all people need to be deinstitutionalized because they do better in smaller environments. And we know that the care provided in institutions is not always the best. So then let's look at the whole Americans with Disabilities Act, which, as I indicated, passed originally in 1990. And the Americans with Disabilities Act applied to all people. It applied to people with disabilities. It applied to people who were regarded as having a disability. And so again, we meant all means all. But then when we start really talking about the Rehabilitation Act and the Workforce Innovations Act and the full employment of people with disabilities, I get a lot of pushback from people who say, is it everyone can work, or should we always look at, or should we only look at all of those who can work? And the Rehabilitation Act, although I haven't said this yet, specifies that regardless that it is presumed that given the proper services and supports, any individual, regardless of the significance of their disability, is capable of engaging in an employment outcome. So I throw this next bullet point out as a question for people to ponder, because the question is, and I still see it, should people with disabilities have to earn the right to employment-related services? And my answer to that is one loud, resounding no. Nobody asked me when I was a teenager whether I was ready for a job. They simply said, if you want money, go get one. So we're going to talk just a couple minutes about the VR process, okay? In order to become a client of the VR agency, you have to have a physical or mental impairment that results in an impediment to employment. An existing school record, Social Security, eligibility, whatever, is sufficient to document the physical or mental impairment. You must also make an application to VR. Just because a VR counselor shows up at an individual's transition meeting or an individual's educational plan meeting does not mean that they are a client of VR. You have to complete the application, and then VR has to make an eligibility determination. You do not, however, have to wait until the school or the social worker or the case manager or whoever it is decides that you are ready to apply for VR. So once an individual is found eligible, you identify the vocational or employment goal of the individual's choosing. Choice is extremely important in the Rehab Act. You have the right to choose your vocational objective. And within reason, you have a right to pursue that vocational objective. So it's not, nobody should be telling you that, oh, well, we don't pay for vocational training for people who are in special ed, or we don't pay for college training, or we don't pay for graduate degrees. You get to choose your vocational objective, and then the supports and the education you need to achieve that goal should be considered. And all of this gets written on an individualized plan for employment, including the services required to achieve the goal. Now, that's kind of an oversimplification, but it's really not that difficult if you follow the steps. Okay. So I think I've said this, that the goal of VR is to help individuals prepare for, secure, retain, advance in employment. The IPE, the Individualized Plan for Employment, has to be individualized to meet the needs of the client. That I stands for individualized. That does not mean that every person who comes through with a developmental disability gets shuttled into 2 or 3 occupations, okay? It has to be based on the informed choice, again, which is not specifically defined in the Rehab Act, but it's used 105 times. And the VR agency and the client work together. And VR must be able to provide the full range of services listed in the Rehab Act to all eligible individuals who apply for services. So you would think since 1973 and the passage of IDEA and the passage of the ADA and all these other laws, we would all be fully employed by now. But that hasn't happened. We still continue to see, up until probably 5 years ago, that school to sheltered workshop pipeline. Individuals were offered the opportunity to go to work at a segregated employment setting where they would be welcomed and supported and protected. You still have the Fair Labor Standard Act, which is part of the laws that govern how individuals get paid. And for those of you who may not be aware, Section 14C by law allows employers to pay people with disabilities less than the federal minimum wage. But up until 5 years ago, that was more or less blanketly applied. If you had a disability, there was a presumption that you had some kind of limiting capability. An administrative review in the state of Ohio, the judge said, no, just because a person has a disability does not mean you can pay them less than minimum wage. You have to demonstrate that the individual's disability affects the work that they are doing, okay? And so a lot of states now are looking at overturning the sub-minimum wage laws. We have DD services and Medicaid funding, which are entities unto themselves that can work in collaboration with other programs, but we tend to keep things very siloed and need to learn how to blend and braid those fundings to give the individual all the support they need. Particularly since there is a pre-vocational option that is funded under Medicaid. For a long time, that has limited people and kept them segregated. So now, nationwide, the goal is competitive, integrated employment across programs. All right, so these are a number of services that VR can provide. These are certainly not inclusive, and I'm not going to really take the time to read them now, just to simply say that if you need assessments to determine what your needs are, VR can provide that. Counselors can provide guidance, support, and placement services, as well as any reading and technology services, training services, etc. So in order to support employment, and again, I want to re-emphasize this, the Rehab Act presumes that individuals, including those with the most significant disabilities, are capable of engaging in an employment outcome. And further, it requires that individuals with the most significant disabilities be given priorities for services. So very quickly, and I'm going to wrap up because I know we want to leave time for questions. There's a couple of mechanisms or a couple of methods for supporting employment opportunities for people with significant disabilities. And one is the supported employment concept, which was developed back in 1986. If the individual has been found eligible for VR, they've been determined to be an individual with the most significant disability, then you could identify supported employment as an appropriate rehabilitation service for that individual. And basically, the supported employment model is what we call a place and train model. It started as a result of Madeline Will, who had a son who was the RSA commissioner at the time, and she had a son with Down syndrome. She recognized that the way traditionally we prepare people for employment is we give them the education, the skills, and the training, and we expect those things to transfer to a job. But she recognized that that was not going to work for her son. So the place and train model of supported employment is that you identify an appropriate job for the individual and you place them on the job, and then you teach them how to do the job. So the supports on the job to learn the job and to maintain it could be a job coach that's paid for by VR, but I think a much more natural and logical approach would be to use current employees who are on the job and use an on-the-job training model. Okay, so the bottom line is there's no expectation that you are going to transfer skills that you learned somewhere else to this new job. Then we have customized employment, which I love these phrases that get coined like they're new concepts. Customized employment is what I think I did back in the 1980s when I was doing job placement. And that results from an individualized, person-centered process, person-centered plan permitted in the Rehabilitation Act. And what it is, it's designed to help increase competitive integrated employment because the process is slightly different. You go through the same process that you would for person-centered planning. Instead of identifying the strengths, they call that first step process is discovery. It's the same thing. What are you good at? What do you like to do? What do you not like to do? What kind of environments do you like to work in? Do you like to work alone? Do you like to work with other people? What do you do on your day off or in the evening? What is it that gets that smile on your face? And then once you have that information, you talk about what kind of employer would utilize those kinds of skills that you have available. And you do a very specific and targeted job search plan. And so that's when you decide who employers might be to approach. And the job development is not the traditional, we're going to take you here to fill out an application. The job development is negotiated with the employer with a specific understanding of these are the things that I'm going to say Johnny, for lack of another name, that Johnny can do. We know that you offer these kind of or that you have these things, you have a need for these within your employment, but Johnny is not going to be able to handle these other tasks. So you negotiate specifically, what is Johnny going to do? What is Johnny not going to do? And how are we going to support him with that? And then again, you provide those post-employment supports to check in and make sure everything is working. So as a quick recap, current employment goals, employment programs for people with disabilities are the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that includes pre-employment transition services. There's also Section 511 in there, which I really haven't mentioned, but it's a new provision in law that prevents any individual with a disability under the age of 24 from going into employment in a sub-minimum wage position unless they have first been referred to VR, received services from VR, as well as received all the other pre-employment transition services. That interacts with IDEA, including the transition requirements. The transition requirements outlined in IDEA mirror the transition requirements in the Rehab Act. Then we have this other little layer, which is the Ticket to Work and Work Incentives Improvement Act, which is simply some additional supports and services that are available to people who are either SSI or SSDI eligible. And we've already talked about the Workforce Investment Act, which morphed into the Workforce Innovations and Opportunity Act, again, places special emphasis on serving individuals with disabilities and youth who are at risk and youth who are low income. So again, special services and supports available. So these are some other programs I mentioned: apprenticeship programs, internships, and on-the-job training, local vocational or trade schools, community and four-year colleges, and American Job Centers. These are just a few of the opportunities. There's so I just want to dispel a few continuing myths, and that is that people who work will lose critical supports and benefits. What I hear all the time is, if I go to work, I'm going to lose my benefits. That is misinformation. It is a session for another day, but there may in fact be an impact, but nothing is immediate, and it's gradual to support your going to work. A lot of people believe that day hab and segregated settings are safer. I'm here to suggest that they are not. I have visited sheltered workshops in this country where deaths have occurred. I hear all the time that people aren't job ready. I have absolutely no idea what job ready means. I think most people just go to work, get a job. They either find they like it and do it well and they stay, or they find they don't like it and they move to something else they like better. There is a true fallacy about productivity assessments, because too often we have people with disabilities doing jobs they are not well matched to do, either because of fine motor controls or whatever. There are a number within segregated settings and within a lot of programs that provide supports to people with disabilities. We continue to see that there is a limit on the types of work choices. Rarely is assistive technology provided. And again, you're going to have a session on utilizing technology for employment, and segregated employers really do not understand the concept of reasonable accommodation. So because of that, prejudice, negative attitudes, and stereotyping cannot be overcome by segregation. Said this, most of us did not have work experiences when we got our first jobs. We went to work. We discovered our career path by securing jobs we liked and leaving those we disliked. There is no shame in not liking a job and leaving. And this is a little quote that I show all the time: helping, and I target this at helping professionals. And I say that the individuals who says it is not possible should move out of the way of those doing it. So people with disabilities deserve opportunities for paid employment, career advancement opportunities, benefits, security, and reasonable commutes, fair bosses and normal supervision, and natural supports. Okay, so that ends my presentation. And before we go to questions, I just want to announce and remind people that this is the first of a 5-part video series. And you should look for and register for the upcoming ones. The next one is alternatives to guardianship and supported decision-making, which is huge. Then followed by Think College Arizona and expanding opportunities for inclusive higher education. And then one of my favorite, Project Search and Work Programs. Project Search is a marvelous model, and so you want to pay attention to that. And the final one of the series will be utilizing technology for employment. So we still have about 9 minutes. Sorry, let's take some questions. And if anybody has questions that don't get answered, if we can capture them, I'm more than happy to answer them after the fact, and we can get them out to you.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
My name's Alyssa Calvano.
Okay.
I think you answered the majority of it. But my son has no interest in school anymore. He's a 12th grader, and a lot of it is because he's always being told he's failing and he's going to have to go to summer school and take another year of 12th grade. He's being very defiant about it. He's high functioning, autistic. He's got ADHD, ODD, sensory, anxiety, he's developmentally delayed, he's with DDD, which the support coordinators keep changing quite a bit. I'm in the process of getting guardianship, and he's very intelligent. I mean, highly intelligent. In 8th grade, he tested at a 12th grade level up to a 30-year-old. And he's always been a 4.0 student up until high school.
Okay.
He is on SSI. So I believe he did mention something about SSI and not getting that taken away.
Right, if he goes to work, earned income in the SSI program is always viewed favorably.
Mhm.
So to, you know, and I'm happy to send you some additional information. The bottom line is only half of what the individual earns will count against
Sorry.
their SSI benefit amount. So I'm gonna use some very rough numbers. Let's say he gets a job and earns $1,000 a month.
Mhm.
That would reduce his SSI benefit check by $500. So he would still get the remaining of his SSI check plus his wages. And should he ever reach the point where he is no longer entitled to a cash benefit check, as
Mhm.
long as his disability continues and the only thing keeping him from his check is earnings, his Medicaid will continue. So
Okay.
that's something to consider. And he may at a later point want to get his GED or something, but right now he needs to, you know, it would be okay for him to go to work and not fear losing his benefits.
I'm just confused about, I mean, not confused. I don't even know if he should.
I think that's a
graduate.
discussion that we should probably take offline because it's longer
Okay.
than the time we have left. What I will say is that, you know, he's telling you what he wants. He's lost
Mhm.
interest in school and he's defiant. So maybe instead of pushing that obstinance or defiance, it's maybe having a conversation with him about, all right, what would you do in the alternative? You have to do something. So what's the alternative for you? But that's just my suggestion.
No, that's a great way of putting it, because yeah, I'll have to talk with him about that because he's very good at technology.
Right. Well, there may be better things for him to do than go to school.
Exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
How do I get into this program though?
Into what program?
Is the VR thing or
You contact the State Vocational Rehabilitation Agency and place an application. All you have to do is get it started and then they can advise you as to next steps. And if you ever have a problem with the services that are being provided by the state VR agency, you can contact the Client Assistance Program in that state
how
for
can we,
assistance.
will this information be in a link or?
We can get it to you. I'm not exactly sure. I'm trying to read the chat box quickly, but we can get you that
Okay.
information. It's not a problem.
Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Cheryl, I had two questions. One, is there any way to contact you after the meeting directly?
Sure.
And what's the best way to do that?
Use my email, which is on the front slide, on the first slide. Send me an email and we can work things out from there.
My other question was, will the deck and or this recording be sent out to participants?
I believe that yes and yes, both.
Okay,
Yes,
cool. Thank you very much. Thank
you're
you for
welcome.
your presentation. It's much appreciated.
Do we have another question? I'm scanning the chat box. Oh, here is the quote that I was supposed to use. Money isn't everything, but it's right up there with oxygen. And that is absolutely a terrific quote because without money, it greatly affects your quality of life issues. And that was by Zig Ziglar. There is a link to the Arizona RSA within the Department of Employment Security, I guess, that is in the chat box. And I see okay. A couple of long messages.
There's one from Becky Campbell. Cheryl, I don't know if you see that or not.
Becky Campbell, let me read it right now. Much has been said about the changes that have happened over the past decades. Interested in thoughts about older workers who may have personal supports and or parents who have historically rejected the institutional work model that has been status quo for so long. Is it realistic to expect people who are older and have never worked to enter the workforce in later stages of life? I'm going to stop there and kind of answer that question because, Becky, I absolutely and 100% agree with you, which is why the emphasis now is on youth. We know that aging individuals, many of whom have all of their friends are in that facility, all of their connections. It's just part of the life that they have grown accustomed to. And I don't think it is realistic to really ask them if they want to engage in community integrated employment unless you can spark their interest through money. Okay, if they're really like tired of being poor, tired of being broke, would like to take a vacation and go to California and can't do it in their current situation, then there's not a lot of motivation. And that's really why the emphasis now is on closing the front door to these facilities. If we can direct our youth into employment and competitive jobs and places other than the segregated facilities, sooner or later, those facilities are either going to close or they're going to have to figure out their adaptive model. I don't know that that really answers your question, but that's why so much of the emphasis now is what I would call diversion. If we were a court system, we would be trying to divert people from the court system. Instead, we're trying to divert people from segregated sub-minimum wage employment. I don't know if that answers your question, Becky. And again, a lot of this is a philosophical discussion, but these are the principles on which I operate. So, I see Diversibility Incorporated provides person-centered plannings on a statewide basis. Again, the link to VR. Are there any other questions that people want to raise their hand and ask? I covered a lot of information in a very, very short period of time. So if you think of questions, do not hesitate to send them to me in an email. I promise I will answer them. You know, I do 4 days worth of training on Social Security work incentives, so people understand what happens to their Social Security benefits when people go to work. We have all kinds of information available. We can help answer some of your questions, but also you have the Arizona Center for Disability Law, and my job is to train the folks that work there. So if you do have questions about what happens if, or who should I contact about, they're going to be much more familiar with the resources that are available in Arizona, and I'm sure they would be happy to answer your questions. So I want to call everyone's attention to the fact that there has been a survey link. I saw it, now I can't find it. Survey link that Jason put in the chat box at 1:51. So please, I know evaluations are important. I wish you all great success and great encouragement in helping to improve the workforce participation of people with disabilities. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was an excellent presentation. We sincerely appreciate it. I'd also like to give special thanks to our team at the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Network, which includes the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, Disability Rights Arizona, Institute for Human Development at Northern Arizona University, and the Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities at the University of Arizona. It also includes the Arizona Association of People Supporting Employment First chapter, Employment First, and Arizona Vocational Rehabilitation. Thank you to our partners. And we will have a recording of today's webinar. We'll make that available to you. Jason is also going to send out a survey, so we ask that you complete that survey. Please provide your comments, and if you have suggestions for future webinars, we'd love to hear them. Thank you very much for joining us today. And again, thank you, Cheryl, for an excellent job sharing information on person-centered planning. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.